大同吗？嗯，那么你给上了俩，公个不啥也给，
First of all, I would like to wish all of you
但是不是的，俺
greetings
这
and
边，
we wish you are well.
那么我这边的继续，对吗？目的需要做新不的，
And today we are continuing the teachings on the 50 verses for the spring teachings.
哦，那今年就三大的，告诉爸爸的，俺是考完都要的啥呢？
Now, the point that we have come to in the text is,
还是啥的啊？
please wait a moment.
告诉爸爸的，
The point we have come to is this.
但
Among
对我
the
记得住吧，啥的
among the 8 ways to
对
show
我记得住吧，
respect,
啥的，那是要给不起，提大
there are
老
8
呢，
subtopics
我
here, and
那是
among
我
these,
最是不是大的的，
we've gone through the first 3, so now we
那没
have
在的考了其他的啥啥的嘛，
come to the fourth of these, which is how to
那没
behave
在的考了
towards
其他的
the
啥的，就
guru's
啥子
things
啥的
and
的
their
啦，
retinue. When we're talking about
今天
how
就
to
啥子
behave
嘛，
towards the guru's things and their retinue, the
那
verse
呢
that
这
teaches
考
this
的
is
太多
always
吧，
think in
那个
equipoise of
那
the
没我
guru's
们
wealth
念
as
的那
like
个
your
考了
life, the
大
guru's
大
loved
的
ones
是
as
啥
like
的，
the guru, and their people as your
那这
family.
个理解了给了这个的，
And so here
对
is
吗？
the
他以前的
here's the
我
Sanskrit and
这不
so
是
forth.
嘛，
So if
写
we
不
go
是，
according to the interpretation of the Sanskrit
那么啥的
commentary,
光是写是不是的吧？
so guru has already been explained.
他们是的，嘛是想这么着，
I think it's better to look at this.
好了说，但那么的光是写是不是的吧？
So the word guru has already been
那么
explained,
这呢，说起形啥，
and
这
it
啥的话
says
可以主要是啥呢？俺那脑里
the guru's
俺那
wealth
个
is like your
啥的，
life. It's just the wealth here
那
means
么
the
大部
wealth of
分
the
主要
guru.
是什么的？那么不
It's
有
the
钱的都
personal
是
wealth of the guru, the possessions of the
那
guru.
天来呀，要写
And
的啥
here,
嘛？
there, if we
光是
discard
写
them,
嘛，
there are
写的
two.
是
There's the
俺这老
personal
天，
wealth and the
俺
property
这
wealth.
的为了啥的
Personal
就
wealth
老了，
means the gold, silver,
俺
and
的
so
真
forth.
的听了啥吧？就是钱，
Fields, houses, and so forth are property wealth.
他拍起我叫家要把它我叫家买不的，今天去
I think it's
什么了？
basically a distinction of whether it can be moved or not.
那说吧，那边看到
Gold
俺
and
的
so forth
说，
can be carried
俺说
carried away with your hands. So these are the
俺
personal
那边
wealth.
看到俺买不的说，
The houses,
俺
fields, and so
钱嘛，
forth are real estate or
俺
property
说嘛呢，
wealth.
说那些走过来是俺说
And
是
so
俺
you should
光写
consider
说
them
的
as
是，
like your life. And so life
意
here
思是
means the
俺是
life
俺
fact.
说，
And
俺
like
我的，
means like just as being just like your life.
他太多吧，
It says their loved ones
那么
here,
心啥的，
and their loved ones like the guru
那
here,
这里呀，这的，
and here
这拿老了呀，那么多吧，那么心啥就用的多，
the Sanskrit commentators of the guru's loved ones like the
那
guru.
那么心啥的，那么能是切合的是，那
So
么
like
多
the guru
吧，
means as you do the
这
guru.
多股票的是呢，
And the loved one
那
here
么的
means
人都多吧，
those people who are dear to the
那老了
guru's
呀，这拿
heart,
老了呀，多嘛，
or according to the
哎，
as it says in
那
the
么得多个多嘛，
it
这拿
says
的
the
啥的，俺
Dukma. It
那
says
个
what this
这个
means.
祖母，但到
It
那
means that
俺
also
那
means
俺那个祖母的，
it can also mean the
没着
Dukma
了，
in
那么
Tibetan
啥，那么
or
说的
the
这地方的，
his loved
那
one.
么
That
意
means
思
his
就是
wife
要
or
给，
his consort. So
伢
it
们
means
就
the
伢们
guru's
给，
wife.
但谁的说了，光那这个有给的，真的，
Now it can also be understood
但
as
这嘞，
the guru's children.
他可能年薪都是啥的
And
了
you
呀，
say, and their people as your
哦，他
family.
可
What
能
it
伢
says
的
in
年
it,
薪都是啥子，你
it
说的
says,
话是吧？
it says
那说
phrases
那
it
是是
differently in
俺这
the
基本不着，那没
um,
考儿，那
uh,
没给你，
it says it differently in
没
the
去年，那没给考
Sanskrit.
的
So,
呀，
but
怎么了？
the people
那
as
么
your
呀，
family means the people around the
都有
guru.
就业吧，哦，但
And
是
all
说
these
吧。
people, for these
那没
people,
考的年薪都是，但这
you
是
should
呀，那
view
是
them as
年
being
能
like,
挣钱的，
you should think about them
就
as
是
being
年
like
给
your own
你的，
family.
年在往能挣钱都是吧？大大的的钱，
And so it means that you should view
年把的
them
下巴
with
给
love and
啥子？
affection.
年把的下巴是60多，
And then there's the world in equipoise here. So you have equipoise here, and equipoise means without any distraction, so never distracted. So without any diversion, so always. I should always view them in this way. So you should also view the Lama's things as like your own things, and should always consider them, the Guru's things like this. You should also consider the Guru's loved ones, the people whom the Guru loves. Should also be held in the same affection. You should pay to respect them in the same way. And so the main point here is that, according to the Sanskrit commentary, is that the student should always in equipoise. I don't think that this means the equipoise in terms of equipoise and post-meditation. Here it means without being distracted. And so without slipping up, they should guard the Guru's wealth like their own lives. Just as they guard their own lives, they should also protect the Guru's wealth. And just as they pay respect to the Guru, they should also pay goodness to the Guru's spouse or consort, just as they do to the Guru. And just as they love your own friends and own people close to you, and just as you feel affection for them and treat them, you should also treat the Guru's retinue the same. So this is the meaning. And here to sort of fill this in with a few quotations. When you talk about the Guru's wealth is like your own, Bhikkhu Dorji wrote about this in the 100 Short Instructions. What he said is this. In particular, the Tantras teach that you should. So in the 100 Short they speak about, in the Tantras says you should protect the Guru's wealth as like your own wealth. You should guard it. You should cherish it like your own wealth. And so for this reason, you may only give the Guru's wealth to whoever the Guru intends, so whoever he wants to use it for. And you need to do it as the Guru wishes only. You shouldn't decide it for your own self and decide, the Guru said this, but then sort of thinking about it and make a decision, it must not be like this and that, and then decide on your own and say that you're using it for virtuous, but you're using it incorrectly, then this is an extremely grave misdeed. And so you should also view all of the Guru's actions similarly. You should view the Guru's own things and only use it the way the Guru intends to. You must use it only as the Guru intends, but if you don't and decide for yourselves and say you should not do that and do something else instead, you think, if you're kind of like guessing what the Guru might want, to think, oh, he probably wants this, and you get kind of upset. If you just sort of imagine that for yourself and do it kind of boldly, then that's not okay. Now, above we were speaking about how to view the Guru's things, how to view their spouse, and how to view their retinue also. It's the way we can. There are many examples of how this was done in the life stories of the Gurus of the past. For example, when there was Lord Milarepa being respectful of Marpa Flotak, and he was similarly respectful to Mother Dakmema, the Mother Neramya, and their son Dode. He didn't see them as ordinary people and just think they were just regular people. He didn't think of them that like. And so there is that life story, or that example. Likewise, there are many stories of him serving the Mother Dakmema. So Milarepa would serve Dakmema when she was milking a cow. She had to sit on you had to squat to do that. So he would sit below, and he would sit he would be there and be like a platform for her to sit on. She would sit on him. It's like a stool to sit on. Of course, he did this for Lord Marba Flotrog, but he did the same thing for Mother Dakmema and their son Dharma Dode. He thought of them also as gurus. Likewise, when the Mahasiddha Lingrepa first went to Pamodrupa, according to the blue animals, at that point, Lingrepa was 38 years old. And the time, or the date, was on the 18th day of the winter month. It was on the solstice day. So that's the day he arrived in Pamodrupa. And so at that time, Lingrepa developed unlimited compassion. And he saw Drogon on there. He also he saw Drogon as, but he also thought that even the trees and birds are most like emanations of Pamodrupa. So like this is a sort of experience and or the great faith that he felt, the incalculable faith that he experienced. Likewise, when Jungen first visited Pamodrupa, he was first, some of the monks didn't have such good conduct, and he was displeased by this. In particular, there was a geshe named Samyepa. And if you give him a bit of yogurt, then he would give you like 5 measures of poor quality barley instead. It's such a kind of this kind of bad behavior or bad intentions. And so this Geshe Samyepa was considered one of the better geshes, one of the better students. And so thinking, if the best ones are like this, if the best one, then the lowest are probably nothing like this. And so at the beginning, he lost faith in the monastic community as a whole. Jigun Jun Sungwon had actually very sharp faculties and realized when he had that bad thought, he realized it was an obstacle. And so when he realized it was an obstacle, then he went to each of the monastics and he prostrated 3 times to each of them. And he recited the 7-branch prayer in the presence of the entire Sangha as many times as possible. He had recited this as many times as he could. At first, people said, he's just kind of being pretentious, he's just pretending. And they said he's pretending to have faith, but later, they actually said that he really had faith. At first, they thought, it's just he was pretending. Is it doing something that no one else would do? I think he was just kind of like pretending to do this. There are people who thought that, but later that people understood that he actually really had faith. And so then he was called a faithful person. So at that time, what Jiten Sungwon said was that if at the beginning you don't correct your broken discipline, later it's difficult to feel actual, genuine faith and respect. If you don't start with contrived devotion, then it's difficult to develop uncontrived faith and devotion. So that is the discussion about the 26th of the stanzas. Now to continue. Now to continue speaking here. First of all, I think it's best to show you the outline. Now, where we've come to in the outline is earlier at the beginning, if we take Lord Tsongkhapa's commentary as the basis, then there are 8 points to how to show respect. In the first 4, we've already gone through the first 4, and so now we've come to the 5th, which is being pure in your immediate behavior. And this one also has 3 subtopics. So there are 3 subtopics to this one. And these are stopping inappropriate behavior, practicing appropriate behavior, and teaching other ways to stop inappropriate behavior. The first of these, stopping inappropriate behavior, has 2 points: the training for when you are in the Guru's sight and the training for when you are in the Guru's hearing. So these are the 2 points: training for when in the Guru's sight and training for when you're in the Guru's hearing. The training for in the Guru's sight means when you're in a place that the Guru can see and how we need to be careful, what behavior we need to do, what we need to pay attention to that point. And even if you're a place where the Guru cannot see, if you're in a place where the Guru can hear, if you're in a place where the Guru can hear you, we also need to be careful and pay attention to certain points. And so here, and as I've mentioned before, we've got when we speak about comparing the 50 verses on the Guru and the ornament of the Mahayana Sutras, there is the line from the ornament of Mahayana Sutras which says, serve the Guru, spiritual friend, with respect, gifts, service, and practice. And so here we are speaking about the steps of serving the spiritual friend with respect. So next we have we're discussing how to show respect to the Guru, how to be polite, how to be respectful. And so there are several stories about most of these. So most of these following stanzas are all about how to show respect to the Guru. And so actually explaining the text is rather easy. It's easy to talk about the meaning of the words, but when you come to actually putting them into practice, there are difficulties to actually putting them into practice. And even if we need to do this, and we think if it's actually important for us to practice the imperative that we frequently practice. In particular, for those who frequently see the Gurus. There are people who frequently come to see the Gurus, right? People who have many opportunities to come to see the Guru. And so if you think about people such as this, then these sorts of behaviors, I think we need to keep in mind and put into practice. And in particular, for serving the Guru, for attending the Guru, it's absolutely imperative that we know how to do them. Now, when you think about there are more than a few of these regarding how to show respect to the Guru. And when we look at them on the surface, they only seem to tell how to show respect with body and speech. How do you show respect physically? How do you show it verbally? How to use polite or honorific speech? And you might think that this is only how it is, but in actuality, and for a student, the one who's kindest in this world, the one who deserves or should be shown the most respect, the one we should actually show respect to, is our Guru and our Vajra Master. And for this reason, you think the Guru is a Vajra Master of Vajradhara, is someone who we should show great respect and be very polite to. And I think that this text shows fairly clearly the way we should show them respect according to the ways of honorable, well-behaved people. And so with respect, we can think it's not just our own Gurus, but also normally when we meet other great beings as well, just how we should show respect and so forth. Now, it's really beneficial for if we do it as now, it's different than it was in the past. Now, there are more connections between different people and ethnic groups. And so if it is single people, and so in this way, if we want to know the level of culture of a person's level, is you have to look at their behavior. Think that with a country, if you want to see how the level of education is, in terms of how long their history is, or and so their degree of prosperity that they have, you can basically see is how they behave in a good or honorable manner, and also how they are polite and respectful. As we say in the Snowland of Tibet, the old Tibetan is that your view may be equal to the gods, but your behavior must comport with other people. And so for that reason, even in ancient times, our forefathers has said that we should take great interest in areas of knowledge related to good behavior and consider them important. I think this is very clear. For example, we have honorifics in Tibet. We have many different honorific words in Tibet. And so if we say that this is one most developed set of honorifics in the world, I think it's fine. It would be fair to say this. Many scholars say that this is a fair thing to say. In particular, if we only think about the honorifics in Tibet, you could make a dictionary of just the honorifics, an honorific dictionary only of the honorific terms. And it would be a very complete dictionary. And what this shows us is that our ancestors said that if we want to determine the honorable and the dishonorable, it is the difference between their prostrations and so forth. The dishonorable are primarily great in sleep and stomach. And so it's either how much are honorable or dishonorable. What distinguishes someone is their behavior or not. The difference is the people who behave well are the honorable, those who behave badly are the dishonorable. So you have to distinguish this in terms of their behavior. In any case, if our ancestors took a great, it's very clear that ancestors took a great interest in our good behavior. And so I think that if those of us who have interest in Tibetan culture and Tibetan history, we should all also take interest in this as well. Likewise, even in the Tibetan tradition, the Buddhist tradition, the basis of the three trainings is the training in discipline. And this is said many times. And when I talk about the training discipline, it's primarily connected with our physical and verbal behavior. And within this, for example, in the Vinaya, the largest category of downfalls are in what we call the category of trainings. So there are 112 trainings there. This is the greatest number of downfalls. This is the greatest number of offenses in this. And so among these, there are 10 related to wearing robes. There are 10 there. And in terms of how you go and walk or travel, there are 20. There are 9 related to how to sit. And when you're going for alms, when you're begging for alms, there are 8 represented for how you beg for alms. There are 21 related to how to eat. And there are 14 related with how to take care of your alms bowl. And there are 26 related to how you should teach Dharma. So there are 26 related to that. And so then in total, there are 112 trainings. And they're primarily only speaking about our behaviors of body and speech. You might think that within Buddhists in general, within Tibetan Buddhists, we talk a lot about view and realization. Think about who has a higher view, how is a view or the realization. But we're talking about view and realization. In fact, who is greater one? If you only speak about that, then it's something like just talking about faith and devotion. Because you can't see someone's realization or faith. If saying that they're like that, you're just sort of taking it for granted. It's a question of having faith. We aren't able to really figure out exactly how much experience or how much realization someone else has. But likewise, what we can see, in terms of a person's actual honorable behavior, their good behavior and fine, upstanding ways is something we can actually say. Likewise, when we speak about the Bodhisattva scriptures, there are among the offenses of 34 that violate virtuous qualities, 12 that violate benefit beings, and so forth. If we know these, they're profound advice on how to benefit beings and not harm beings. So they're very beneficial instructions for us. Likewise, in the secret mantra, there are many vows in Samaya, but the basis for them is not rejecting the Dharma, having faith and conviction in the Guru, being compassionate towards sentient beings, and so forth. And the behaviors that are related, physical and verbal behaviors related to the Guru are taught here in the 50 verses of the Guru in a single text. So if we understand them in detail, then we all know what is good behavior in relation to the secret mantra. So we'll gain a good, fair degree of knowledge of that. So it's very important for us to know that. When we think about this good behavior that's taught in the 50 verses of the Guru. So the good behavior is taught in this the secret mantra. So if we don't usually take interest in it, but if we do pay attention to it, it's something that we have not. There are many great old gurus who are still with us. And so they always continue to do these, to perform these behaviors, but we don't pay much attention to it. And we don't see the way that they act and what's taught in the 50 verses. We don't see the connection. We're not able to make a connection before that. And because we aren't able to make that connection, we aren't really able to recognize, oh, this is that. And so for that, it's like our older Sangha members, many of the old ones that actually practice all these, they put them into practice. And likewise, whether you have the people in the Tibet and Himalayan regions who engage in put into practice many behaviors that are taught in the 50 verses. And I think if we pay attention to it, we can know this. Likewise, if we want to take a look at actual historical examples, like in the Karma Kagyu history, there's a person named Gui Gumpa Rinchen Pal. Gui Gumpa Rinchen Pal, if you wonder who he is, according to the Feast of Scholars, what it says is that Gui Gumpa Rinchen Pal was a student of Lord Rangjung Dorje, the third Karmapa Rangjung Dorje. Well, the third Kambaja was in the area of Tulung, and down at the bottom of that valley, there's a place called Netang. And he would set up a camp there, and while he was there were a bunch of little children there. There were many little children. They were gathering cow dung. They were gathering the dung of the livestock, and they were playing. And at that time, there was a guard dog for the encampment that was tied down, right? It had been tied down, and it got loose. And the children were playing gums, and so they couldn't. They went right towards them, and all the others didn't know what to do. They couldn't know what to do. But among them, there was one child. He was actually pretty clever. What he did is there was like a wicker container that was used for gathering firewood, right? It's like this woven of things, so it was like this container for that. And he turned it upside down. And he crawled in underneath it, and he stayed there. And so inside it, and he stayed inside. He pulled the rope inside, and he killed that. And the dog kind of ran all around him. But no matter how many times it ran in, it wasn't able to get in, wasn't able to bite him. So the dog didn't have anything to do, so it left. So everyone said, oh, that kid is really, really clever, everyone said. Everyone was really amazed. And so Rangjung Dorje then saw this. So that book was really intelligent, different than others, and understanding this. He asked who their parents, and then he said, you should, please, would it be okay for you to give me your child? And when he said that, he asked him to give it to him, then the child's two parents said, they offered him the child to him. And when they did, then in any way, but he came very well known in the two traditions of Sutra and Tantra. He was given the name of Guyi Gumpa. So this Guyi Gumpa these days, it's like a Changzi or the steward. It's like a title. It's a position. It's sort of like the Changzi or the steward. So he became the steward for the third Karmapa Rangchen Dorje, and also the fourth Ronglapa Dorje, and also for the fifth Deshin Shikpa. In any case, he was the steward for them. And because he was so well known in both the worldly and Dharma affairs, all the officials, including the princes of China and Mongolia and the Great Mem, the chief officials of Tibet, the Sito, and all other peoples, they considered him to be really an important figure. Because he had a brain. Whether you think about it in terms of Dharma or politics, he was extremely smart. And so everyone called him Great Master, but no one called him by any other name. They had such great respect for him. And when it's said that, the thing is about it, in terms of there was no one greater than them ever who had done more for the teachings of the Karmapa. And this is what it says in the Dharma history, the Feast for Scholars. Likewise, the Lhorong Dharma history says of him is that the Guyi Gumpa Rinpoche later served as Dharma Lord Rinchen Dorje's attendant. And the way he followed the spiritual friend, it is that he practiced exactly taught as in the 50 verses on the Guru. It's like he did everything that this says that you should do. So these were all, he had all of the qualities taught in the 50 verses. Later, the Dharma Lord Karmapa Deshin Shekpa also helped extend his lifespan so that he got to a rather advanced age. And so, so it said that he extended the lifespan of Guyi Gumpa Rinpoche so that he could live to a long age. In any case, thus these teachings from the 50 verses on the Guru are something that if you're an authentic Guru, that you're able to actually put into practice. And something that you should put into practice. Sometimes we think that the things that are taught in the 50 verses, you say you should do this or that, and we just take an understand of it. If you think it's just enough, is that enough? That's not enough. It's not enough to just understand them. It's not just understand the meaning, or to realize the meaning. And it's also not a presentation of philosophy. A presentation of philosophy, if you have a good understanding, then that's enough, right? But these behaviors, are all things you have to put into practice, things that you have to do in your own actual life. It's not just something that you kind of leave it as something in your brain. It's something you have to incorporate into your heart, and that you have to show in your expressions of body and speech. So now next to continue, I will speak about I'll show you the root text. Now the root text here, when we're speaking about the training for when you're in the Guru's side, there are several stanzas on this. And the first one says, don't sit on their bed or walk before them, wear a turban or drape yourself, step on a cushion or place your hands upon your hips when in their presence. And so this is taken according to the Sanskrit commentary, as it says there. And so if we're taking the Sanskrit commentary on the 50 verses and the contour is this, then don't sit. The bed here means it means a couch. As if you say that for the word ten means like a place to bed, it's sometimes understood as a place to sleep, a place to lie down. Now, most people in the past only had one place to sleep and one place to sit. They didn't really have a difference between where you sat and where you slept. So basically, it's a bed means a place where you can lie down or sit. And to sit means here. It's to sit down on, or to lie down, to sit on, or to be on it. Then walking before them, Instead, like before them goes ahead of the guru. And then a turban means like oh, now the turban here means fabric that you wrap around your head, sort of like the Punjabis. They wear fabric around their head, right? So this is what's called a turban. So it's wearing like a fabric around your head. The next one is to drape. It says wrap here in the text, but it means drape actually. It's to drape yourself. It's like have like a hanging an overrobe over your shoulders. It's to hang it or drape it over your shoulders, or a fine metal. Now, in the old days in India, it was a sign of respect. Like these days, they also do it, right? In India, when you have a guest, they wear various different headdresses or various mantles that they wear. And so you wear this as like a sort of fine mantle, and you then sit on it. If you sit on a seat while wearing this, then that's not okay. Do not do it. So here's that. And then there's a stepping on the seat. And what it means placing your feet on their seat. Then there's hips here. Hips are on your hips. The hips are like basically your pelvis, right? You have your pelvis. The different ways you can understand this. One is that you can resting your hands on your pelvis. So this is called the or with your hands akimbo, your hands on your pelvis. Also, you can place put your hands and your upper arms on the ribs and so forth. But basically, it's primarily putting your hands. So this is what we mean called or you can say that you can put your hands on your back. Just so we can talk about having your hands on your back. So putting your hands behind your back at the butt, so you can sit with your hands on your back. So it's sitting like that. So there are different, several different meanings for placing your hands upon your hips. So you need to talk on your hips or on your behind in your sacrum. You can put them in various places. So these are what they are understood as. So that is like an extension of the commentary. Now, as for the meaning, there's like giving them a point according to Lone Tsongkhapa's commentary. And what it says is that this don't sit on a bed should be adjoined to when you're in the Guru's presence. And so it's just saying that when you're not in the Guru's presence, what this means is it's not okay to lie down on a bed when you're in the Guru's presence. And when you're walking, you shouldn't walk before in front of the Guru. You should not walk in front of the Guru or ahead of the Guru. When you're talking about wrapping your head or with that wearing a turban means that in the presence of the Guru, you have to add the word in the presence of the Guru. You need to wrap you shouldn't wear a turban in the presence of the Guru. Nor when you sit on a seat. You shouldn't sit down on the seat before the Guru gets it. It says it's not okay to sit on your own seat before the Guru does. And it's like when the Guru is on the bare ground, it's not okay for you to stay on your cushion. Likewise, if you place your hands on your hips, and it's not okay to sit with your hands on the hips as okay in the presence of the Guru. In any case, the main point is this is actually fairly easy to understand. And the reason is when it's saying that, but it's saying that it's not talking about this in a bed, not staying on a bed here. It's different than just on the. It's basically saying you can't be on a bed where you would sleep. I think that's what it must mean. Likewise, when going, you can't walk ahead of the guru. So the guru is ahead of you. These days, when you pay attention, then they have the gurus go first, and then they come ahead. Otherwise, you shouldn't go if you walk in front and make a big deal of yourself. Then that's not right. You should allow the guru to go first. Likewise, in the presence of the guru, there are different various hats that we can wear, and these are a particular purpose for those. And when we're doing a ritual, then you may wear the hats. But other than that, you shouldn't wear various things on your head. If you do this, then it's disrespectful. Now, before the guru sits down, then you shouldn't sit down. So if you sit down before the guru does, then that's disrespectful. So this is also our tradition, right? If the guru is sitting on the ground and you're on a seat, then that's not good. And if the guru is over there and you're sort of sitting there with your hands on your hips or leaning back, then this is not good. It's a sign of great pride. And so you should not do these. Now, to continue, so now these are the second, the trainings for when the guru is side. It says, do not stay sliding down or seated when the guru stands up. Always perform the activity with the greatest skill and energy. If we go through the meaning of according to the Sanskrit commentary, lying down means, look, when you're lying down. So it's lying down here. You should not do that in the presence of the guru. And so you can't just lie down in front of him. It says, do not stay. It says basically not sitting. Do not remain. The main is you don't remain there. When you say getting up, when the guru stands up, when the standing up means rising into a standing position, this is what it means. The next is like as an energy and skill or exertion. And so it means that you're always enthusiastic and fulfilling the guru's activity and as much as you can with the greatest exertion. And so I'll explain this later, so that is enough for now. Now, according to Je Tsongkhapa's commentary, what Lord Tsongkhapa said, there's the translation by Chaklo Tsa, right? Now, this is the other translation of the 50 verses. It's no longer extant, but Tsongkhapa did see it, and what it says is that, so do not stay lying down or seated when the guru is seated or standing. And what this should be understood is that when the guru is standing, the student may not lie down or sit. So when the guru is seated, do not lie down. And so when the guru is seated, do not lie down. So at all times, you should have the great skill and energy. So you should basically have energy or lightness. Basically, being very good at accomplishing the guru's activities. So the energy or lightness means like some people like, some people like this, right? If the guru is about to do something, then they're immediately getting up and immediately, like they're very quick to get up. It's like they're very easy to get up. This is what it means. This means that they're sitting there, not moving until the guru starts to move. And lying down like a corpse, that's not okay. So what does the guru need? Then immediately, someone is very sharp-eyed. They see that. Some people know. They just know if you have to give something to them. If they know when they see the guru's hand, they know exactly what they need to give them. And some people are like, it's just like throwing a rock at a sheet, and you have no idea what's going. Some people, the guru says, do something or get something, and said, what's going on? I don't know. They're just like unable to completely understand anything. So people like that. So someone who's like able to, I mean, someone who's quick to move and able to, you can move or sit, or this is what we should need. It should be like. And so it's basically saying, so you should basically shouldn't just lie there like someone like a corpse, like someone who doesn't know whatever. Someone who's never. Instead, you need to be able to be ready to be sent anywhere. Now, if you take the Sanskrit commentaries basis, it said up through here, this teaches the restraint of the body. So it teaches, so it's saying this is the restraint of the body, restraint of the speech, and restraint of the body and speech. So up to this point, teaches the restraint of the body, if we take it according to the Sanskrit commentary. Then to continue, we've come to the third value, on the third of the trainings in the Guru's presence. If we take this according to Tsongkhapa's commentary. So this is the third stanza of the trainings for the Guru's presence. Do not spit mucus and the like. Stretch out your legs when you are seated. Walk to and fro or have arguments while in the presence of the Guru. What the Sanskrit commentary says is, do not spit is taught in combination with the restraint of the speech. Mucus and like phlegm and so forth. This gets included within the speech here. So mucus and like is like the word and so forth includes nasal mucus and residue from your teeth and tongue, like nasal mucus, like a runny nose, the stains from that, and basically something left in this, the residue and stains on the tongue or teeth. They should not be just expelled at any place at all. Because Tibet is a clean place. It's also a very vast place, and there weren't a lot of people. And so when you're blowing your nose or spitting up mucus, you could just spit them anywhere. But these days, it's not so nice in current society. The things that people didn't like. It's so like when someone would blow their nose, they just blow it right there, just do it right there. But if you just do it anywhere, it's probably not a big problem in Tibet if you're doing it anywhere. But if in these days, it's not at all. If you do this in a city, it's really not good at all. It seems very filthy to blow your nose and spit various and to hack up something and spit it out someplace. That's not good. That's not good at all. So you shouldn't just expel mucus, spit up things everywhere, cough up things everywhere. And so they said, so the stretching out your legs here, the spelling needs to be corrected. Stretching out, if you sit there stretching out your legs, some people sit with their legs stretched out. And this is a sign of carelessness. So sitting with your legs stretched out is like being careless. So walking about. So there's a walk to or fro and have arguments. So here walking about. Chaksha basically means going back and forth, like going back and forth without pacing back and forth without any purpose, right? I think this is what we mean here. And having arguments here means, speaking about, it means debating. It means having debate. This is a question of not like debate and dharma, but in terms of having arguments. Speaking words of disagreements, that's what should be understood. And we should not do these in the presence of the Guru. Now, if we discuss this according to Lord Tsongkhapa's commentary, what this says is that when you spit music and the like includes expelling nasal mucus, sputum, and so forth. You should not spit them. Do not stretch out your legs when sitting on a cushion. You shouldn't pace to and fro. As if there's a walking back and forth in a place where there's no point. And having arguments in the presence of the gurus. In the presence of the guru, you shouldn't have conflict or arguments in the guru's presence. You shouldn't do this according to the gurus. And if you do this, then it is disrespectful. And this is very clear, right? If you're coughing up your mucus and so forth in the guru's presence, this is not legs. This is very careless, right? This is you should not do this. And instead of walking back, like going back and forth in the guru's presence, then you shouldn't do that either. And if you're arguing about disagreements, then you should not do that either. And so next, to continue, this is the fourth stanza, isn't it not? The fourth stanza. This is another point. If we need something, we need to split into two parts. And the reason first is that according to Tsongkhapa, the first half of this don't show affection to one another, sing, dance, or play and music. These are what we do in their sight, and the rest part are conversing in a place where they can hear. Are trainings for in the place where they can hear. But here, when we just divide them like this, maybe we have to divide and so it's okay for the Tibetan, it's fine, but if you look at it in terms of the Sanskrit and the English and so forth, it's difficult. But if we take it according to Tsongkhapa's commentary, it's basically we talk about the first two lines, so the trainings in the guru's sight, and the second couplet is for the training in the guru's hearing. So when you talk about not showing affection and so forth, so this is a very, like when you're talking about it's translated differently in Tibetan. It's a difficult. The understanding in the Indian commentary is not very good. I don't understand 100 places, but in any case, it's basically praising one another. So the word. There are two ways to understand the word that's translated to one another. One of these is to one another. And there's also and then there's the word shamgayana. There's a sangayanam. It can be understood as praising one another. Anyonyanyams. I can understand one for each other. So it's basically praising one another or showing affection to each other is probably what it means. And the second one is singing. So it's like singing a song, singing a melody. And music means like lutes or drums and so forth. And dance, things like doing seductive or fearful or doing all the different 9 expressions of dance and so forth. Basically dancing, and that's what it means. Now, this is if we take Lord Tsongkhapa's commentary as a basis, then here's it. The first line here, translated as do not show affection, means like massaging limbs and so forth, or rubbing your limbs and so forth. Song, dance, and music mean do not do, doing song, dance, and music. You should not do these in the guru's presence. The exception is that if during a Ganachakra you must sing a song or play music, there's that, right? those are an exception, he says. Otherwise, if you don't have the permission of the guru, without the guru's instruction, if you just start singing all these various songs and music and so forth without any particular purpose and without the guru's permission, that is not all right. The next one says, or have converse in a place where they can hear. So to continue. So if we take this according to Tsongkhapa's, the way he divides it into two halves, the second and third, the fourth lines in the Tibetan, or from or converse in a place where they can hear. Says, do not this in the place. So here the conversing means, to take it according to this, talks about, it's basically, it's like a factual, or a factional discourse. Like these days I'm talking about if they're different groups or people. Talk about these. As the Kampa says, like in Tibetan we say the Kampa says, is the Amdo say, but the people from Central People, Tibet say this. This is, we're talking about discourse or discussions that are like between, when you're showing your bias, your attention. So if there's biased speech, the Kajus do this, the Sakyas do this, the Geluk do this, and then the Nyingbas do this. And we talk about this, and you should not have such conversations in the presence of the Guru. And do it in the place where the Guru can hear. It says you should not do it where the Guru can hear it. If we take it according to Lord Tsongkhapa's commentary, this means a foolish topic. This is talking about various pointless things or meaningless things. Speaking about worldly affairs, there's no point, that have no... if you're just saying everything they've heard or seen, you should not speak about these in the Guru's presence. Now, if we take Lord Tsongkhapa's commentaries, we've come to the next one, is practicing appropriate behavior. So practicing appropriate behavior, what this is, as I said before, the things that what you're not allowed to do. Now we've come to the topic of the things that you are allowed to do. Things that are appropriate to do, or that you should do. So these are, bow when rising from your seat and be respectful when you are seated. At night when the road is dangerous, from waters go first if instructed. To discuss according to explained according to this, the Sanskrit comedy, bowing means to pay homage. And from your seat means when you're rising from your seat and standing up. And so we're talking about the dangerous roads that are dangerous from the water. So waters means like rivers here. At night means in the dark, and waters means rivers. A dangerous road means a road that is dangerous and kind of like a road where there's some danger. If it's that sort of a danger, and then it says you should ask and make the request, and then if instructed, if the Guru says at the night, if they can't see the road clearly, and there are also some rivers and water and dangers, then at that point, then you can ask. And normally the student is not allowed to go ahead of the Guru, but if there's a particular need, you can ask the Guru, and you may go first, ahead of them. Now, if we take, according to the interpretation of Lord Tsongkhapa's commentary, then there's the word bow. It means when you're standing up or sitting down, then at that point, you should do it with a respectful behavior. You should sit respectfully and stand up respectfully. Likewise, when you're traveling at night or crossing rivers, when you're in various dangerous paths and roads, you can ask the Guru's permission And if you're going at night, you can go ahead to see the way, or you can crossing rivers when there are places that are dangerous. In Tibet, in the past, you would always see if you could ford the river. These people don't understand how to this is testing the waters. But in the case of first testing it the way, and then you have to ask the guru's permission. If you go, then there's no fault. And then to continue, the same is teaching other ways to stop inappropriate behavior. So above there are the things that we are not allowed to do. There are many that were inappropriate behaviors. Now, there are some other inappropriate behaviors that are included. So he's saying that he's teaching these. When they're in the teacher's sight, the wise do not let their bodies fidget, they do not lean on pillars and such, and also do not crack their knuckles. And what this says is, it means the intelligence says the students are intelligent students. They don't fidget their bodies. And so to not lean on pillars is basically leaning against or reclining on a pillar. And a pillar is just an example. And similarly, you should also not, or on people, when you shouldn't lean on them, you shouldn't lean on walls or people and so forth. They're all included in this. It says, don't crack your knuckles. So this is basically stretching and cracking your knuckles. You should not do this. And so I'll give the explanation later. If you take it according to Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary, what he's saying is that before the master, the intelligent students shouldn't just kind of fidget their bodies, it's like moving back and forth. They shouldn't lean back their backs on pillars and so forth, and they shouldn't crack their knuckles. And so cracking their knuckles here, the knuckles are these, right? We have the three knuckles on each finger. We have the three joints on each finger. We have 1, 2, or 3 fingers. So these are the joints. So Zhangwa here means to. There's the deficit. So it says cracking here can be. But what it means here is, according to the Sanskrit commentary, if you look at the Sanskrit man, that's what it means. Some people, they do this. Some people do this, right? They pull out their fingers and it goes chop, makes a sound. This makes a noise, chop, chop. So you aren't allowed to do that. You shouldn't do that in the Guru's presence. You shouldn't pull your fingers and crack your knuckles to that. Some people do it like this to make the noise, and they do various things to crack their knuckles. You shouldn't do those in the Guru's presence. You shouldn't do it like this. Some people pull the joints and they make noise, right? So you shouldn't do any of that. You also shouldn't lean back on pillars and walls and cracking your knuckles and fidgeting back and forth, like turning around, like moving this side and that. You shouldn't do these in the Guru's presence. There's nothing to misunderstand. It's just a question of whether you can put into practice. And the sixth is teaching about these particulars of physical and verbal activity, of paying respect to physically and verbally. So this has the distinctions of paying respect with the body, and the second is paying respect with the speech. You think about it in terms of the outline. So here we are. There are 8 topics under how to pay respect, and we've already gone through 5. So we've come to the 6th, how to pay respect with body and mind, or body and speech. So the particulars of paying respect with body and speech has the particulars how to pay respect with the body. And so this, first of all, begins saying, when washing their feet or else anointing or massaging their body and so forth, begin and also end with prostrations and do it as is pleasing. So when you talk about washing their feet or else anointing, if we take it according to the Sanskrit, washing their feet means washing the Guru's feet, using water to remove the dirt from the Guru's feet. And so washing the dirt off of the Guru's feet with water. So there's anointing their bodies. There's also anointing their bodies. So what this means, it actually means, according to the Sanskrit commentary, according to the Sanskrit commentary, it's basically rubbing the body with like sesame oil and so forth. It's spelled differently. So it shouldn't be washed. So basically, it means anointing the body with oil or rubbing it or smearing it with oil. So it seems like there's probably an extra letter in the Tibetan. So actually, first is wash, put these, but the second should kua in Tibetan, or should be anointing. So basically, rubbing their body with oils that are good for their health. Jiluar is anointing them. So there's also massaging them is moving them to remove it's basically so niyama means massaging them. So mardana in Sanskrit. Some people are pushing down and with your hands or your fist and kneading and so forth. When you do this, you should do this. You should begin and also end with prostrations. Before you do all these, you should prostrate and then do these. Let's say washing and feet and so forth. Before you do them, you should prostrate. You should be preceded in prostration. Then do it as its places. So you should do it as is logical, so that it is as appropriate. So you do whatever is most comfortable. So for some gurus, if they're their feet, if you wash them with feet, then their feet with water, then if they have a particular physical condition, then you shouldn't wash it with water. And so you may also wash them with like a mud or like with clay. And this is also to practice like this. It doesn't mean that you actually have to do it necessarily with water. So you do it what is best or what is appropriate. So if you take Tsongkhapa's commentary as a basis, when washing the guru's feet with water, rubbing them or drying them or massaging them and so forth, you should always begin by or precede it with prostrations. And when the action has been completed, you also need to end it with prostrations. When you're talking about prostrations, what I think of when you take about prostrations, we think about our usual prostrations where we stand up and prostrate, right? So that's what we immediately think of. But in the Indian tradition, there's standing up and prostrating. If you do that, but in the Indian tradition, there is no need to stand up. You would, while you're kneeling, you can prostrate 10 times. It's not like you can stand up. I think that from one perspective, it probably was in India, but it's not well known. For example, in the Theravada tradition, when they don't stand up to prostrate, they do, and they especially don't have any full prostrations. So what we think is when we say prostrate 3 times, we think of our normal way of prostration. But when you think about that, when you're washing the feet, because if you have to kind of extra excessive, if you complicate it when you have to stand up prostrate, it's an extra work. But we normally think, if you think about the Indian prostration, it's very easy, right? Because you're kneeling, and so while you're kneeling, then you prostrate 3 times. You just bow 3 times. And you touch your head to the ground. You join your palms and touch your head to the ground. Then there's a prostration, right? If you think in this way, then I think that sort of prostration is something that you can do easily whenever you're walking or doing whatever you're doing. I've heard of this, like in Thailand. There's Thai massage, which is very well known, right? Thai massage is very well known. When the Thai massage is like sometimes you have to massage the king, right? You have to massage the king. When you're massaging the king, then you have to be extremely respectful. You have to prostrate and do various things. First, you have to, before you prostrate, before you massage them, you have to do various things before you begin and after you've done it and so forth. So similarly, so that there was this old tradition, likewise, in Tibet. when cutting the guru's hair, when they're shaving their head, before shaving their head, the person who shaved their head would prostrate them before they did this, and then again afterwards. So this is a tradition before. So what this is saying is when you're doing a particular washing their bird or so forth, when doing something particular for them before them, you should need to do it in a respectful manner. You should show respect and just do it any old which way, but it's like a little bit of a ceremony. If it's like a little practice, a little way of showing that it's like a superior, so you prostrate then. Otherwise, there's no particular reason, but it's like to show how significant the guru is, how superior the guru is, you prostrate to them in a form of a ritual or as a form of practice. Because of this, the action that you do after that becomes like a special thing, like a particular activity that you're doing. Okay. Then following this is the specifics of serving the guru with your speech. I mentioned not by stating their name, but add to its end an honorific. Say words that tell of their distinctions in order for them to feel devotion. So if you think about it according to the Sanskrit commentary, the first one, it says, the word's a little bit different. It says a little bit different. In any case, it says mention them not by saying their name. You don't say their name exactly. You can't just say their name. So instead, at the end, you have to add like the word add the word pada in Sanskrit at the end of the word. The end of the word, you should say like feet at the end. So it's like the pada or feet. So you'd have to say that at the name. If you have the name Sri Ratnakara Shanti, if you speak to them, you call them Shantipada or Shanti's feet. If you would say Shanti's feet, but the other person does not know who you're speaking about, then what you should say is that in order for the other person to say, then you say some words that tell other distinctions. So you should expect other words that distinguish them, that they're from this particular place, or they have with this sort of a behavior, this sort of place, or whether they're tall or short, or light or dark skinned, and so forth. And you speak about them, you speak of their qualities at the basic point. If you're speaking about the Guru's name, Ratnakari Shanta, it's not okay to say the Guru's full name. Instead, if you're going to say Ratnakara Shanti, you take the last part of the name, like Shanti, and use that word Shanti, and not say the rest, and then say and then add a Shanti. It's like saying in English, Mr. So if you're talking about say Mr. or Lord Shanti or so forth, then the other person doesn't understand. Then what you say is you add a word that tells of their distinctions. So the one, the Shantipada, who is from the east, or Mr. Shanti, who's from the east of India, or say from the great Shanti. So there's a particular, and so that the person will understand whom you're speaking about. And so there's this one sitchin that also comes up in the Vinaya. For example, if we look at Acharya Shakyaprabha's 300 verses on the Vinaya, what it says is, use respectful actions by saying for a purpose, and then bow when you say or compose name. Juniors use respectful names when addressing seniors, and use the term Ayushman for juniors as well. And the meaning of this is that when you're what he's saying in his auto commentary called the Luminous on the 300 verses, when you're saying the Guru's name, you should say the word for the purpose of. Before you say the Guru's name, you say for the purpose of, to mention the abbot's name for a purpose, you should say. You should say it respectfully. You should say this in a respectful fashion. If you don't say the word to mention the abbot's name for a purpose, and just say the abbot's name all on its own, then that's not okay. And likewise, if you're speaking to those who are senior to you, then you should use the word, words venerable. And in those who are younger, for juniors, you should use the word Ayushman or so forth. And for elders, use the respect elder. And so what the main point is saying is that when you're speaking, when you have your abbot, in the Vinaya, your abbot, you have your own abbot, right? And your abbot is incredibly important. So before you say the Kempo's name, you should say, to mention the name for a purpose. When you're saying the Kempo's name, say Kama Lodra Singye, you say, and to say to mention his name and for a purpose, you'd say Kama Lodra Singye, and so forth. And likewise, what it also says in the Vinaya is if someone is not your abbot, then you may not call them an abbot if they're not your Kempo. Your abbot, later than the word abbot or Kempo, became like a title for someone of an education, for someone who's completed their education. As if it's a title for someone who has that, or if it becomes like a title, like the abbot of a monastery. But in the old days, the abbot in the Vinaya, it meant the person who gave you the vows according to the Vinaya. And so you were not allowed to call someone who was not your Kempo to call them Kempo. But some people were given the name Kempo or abbot. And so everyone called them abbot and abbot. And for that reason, if you may call them by they call it abbot. Otherwise, you are not allowed to call someone who is not your own abbot to be your abbot. So if they're older, you can call them venerable. If they are younger than you can say respectable or Ayushman. Likewise, in the practice of the Tibetan masters of the past, whether it was your own, speaking about your own guru or your own Kabo, you would say, one whose name is difficult to say. Just to speak about them for a person, to speak about the one who's difficult to say by calling them by their name for a purpose, it's like someone who's like incredibly important, incredibly significant. It's so significant that you can't even say their name. But if it's because for a purpose, if there's a reason for saying it, then do that. Then you can say. Then you may. Then you have to say. And so for that, to mention for a purpose the name of one whose name is difficult to say, then if you say that, then you can mention their name, whether you're guru or your abbot or so forth. Now, another practice that happened is that while the guru is allowed, you would not say the name whose difficult is name. It's only after they have passed away that you could say the word whose name is difficult to say. While the guru is alive, you would say to say their name for a purpose and reason, and you would not say the word whose name is difficult to say. Once the guru had passed away, when they'd already passed a part of nirvana, then you would say to say the name of him whose name is difficult to say for a purpose and reason. And so what this shows is how important your guru is in absence and how much great faith and devotion you have in them. In any case, if you do not, actually, among many cultures, in particular when you speak of your guru, of course, and of course your parents, but if there is a senior to you, or if they're older than you, then you don't actually call their names now these days. Everyone in Tibetan, everyone says Genla, or teacher in Tibet, right? If they're older than you, call them Genla, which is mean elder or teacher. And we call people who are older to you. If they have children, then you can call them a father, or you can call them. And if they're women who are older women, you can call them mother. But these days, if you aren't careful, people say, when we say this to people, their father or mother, then they look and they say, I'm not that old. I'm not that old. I'm still young, they say. We call them father and grandfather and so forth, or grandmother and father. You have to be really careful when you say these nowadays. particularly when you say this to women, it's like in China, it's like you have to call them beauty. Whether they're beautiful or not, you have to call them beauty. If you call them beautiful, then they're delighted about it. When you go to a restaurant or a restaurant or any place, you have to call them beautiful. It's like there's nothing bad saying it. If you're just calling everyone's beautiful, it means nothing anymore. Because they're showing respect to people. Basically, respectful is something so other people say. Whereas from your own feeling, if it's only your own thing, that's not the main thing. But it's like for others, what I think is if other people think about it, respect is especially for that. As for just thinking about the other person's feeling, the way the other person thinks. That's what we're thinking about respect. So in this respect, if you do this, and if you do these things, then people like it. As it becomes easy for people. So respect is basically this, right? So for this reason, when you're talking about paying respect to the gurus and the khenpos, it's not to please the gurus and khenpos, to make them feel comfortable. It's to not make any problems for them. That's why we do it. This is why we do it in society, right? So this is kind of basic reason. If we think about it in this way, that's what we need to understand. But if we don't understand the main point, and think that paying respect is just like a custom, it's like an external thing, then there's no point to it. For one thing, being respectful is good, but if you don't understand the main point, and if it's just like an external expression, but you have no feeling inside, if it's just the external expression there's nothing important, there's nothing to be happy about there. Because for one thing, you can see whether you actually have respect deep inside yourself. Some people pretend to have it, and they do everything. It's like they're just performing all the respectful emotions. And it's like you're speaking either from, just only your mouth. But it's just talking from your throat up. It's not talking about what's... People can know this. If you don't have the feeling from inside, but you're just expressing it physically, it doesn't have a point. So because having faith and devotion from inside, and that is then being expressed that with your actions of body and speech, then I think there's a point there. In the past, there's the writing of Miki Torti that I've seen. We have faith and devotion. There's a difference. Faith is the word, is what is said in the treatises. And devotion is a word from the Pith instructions. It's the word that's used in the texts on Pith instructions. And devotion has a particular thing there. What's greater than that is you've got longing and dedication. So longing and devotion and dedication. And so this can be what Gupa's dedication here means that it shows the acts of your body and speech, and not just in the longing your mind, but it also shows because of the power of faith, the physical and verbal expressions of it, and this is what it shows. And so for that reason, devotion is better than faith, because faith is basically the mind. It's a quality of the mind. It's like an expression of the mind. But if you only keep it, instead of keeping it in your mind, if you display it or express it in your physical and verbal behavior, then it becomes strong. Then that's what we call devotion. And we could see this very clearly in the life story of Milarepa. Lord Milarepa, when he went to Lord Mabe, he had faith, he had belief. It's not just like someone said, he had belief. It's like in it's the body, the expressions of body and speech. It's something you could actually see. Through his physical and verbal expressions, you could see clearly exactly how faith is. And that's what we mean by devotion. If you have great devotion, then it just naturally comes out as an expression, physical or verbal expression. And so that we can see exactly how much power it has. So if you have great devotion, then you actually have a lot of dedication and respect for the guru. If you only have faith, then it's not so certain, right? It's like you just have the faith, a sincere faith. It's like you're delighted in your mind. And so it's excellent. Those are going to say they have faith, and that's fine. So, okay. So we'll leave it here for tonight.